While the flat earth theory has been widely discredited, the fascination with such an increasing interest in the ideology continues to linger, leading to further speculation and many more questions than answers. Though it was widely believed for a while that the Earth being a sphere has been common knowledge only over the past couple hundreds of years, in actuality it's been known by scholars since around 323 BC. The first known mention of a round Earth was around 6th century BC by Pythagoras, despite many other Socratics maintaining that it was actually flat. It was in 550 BC when Anaximander was convinced that the Earth was a short cylinder with a flat, circular top which remained stable. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, people believed that the planet was a disk floating in the ocean, a theory backed up by the Israelites. It was in the 4th century when Plato also made note of a round Earth, and by 330 BC Aristotle began spreading word of it being a sphere around the entirety of Greece. However, Muslims in the Middle East completely rejected these theories and were convinced that the world was flat. Some historians believe that the Quran saw it this way. Furthermore, in Revelation 7 of the Christian Bible, the verse reads Jesus' description, quote, "I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth," end quote, which added to the conviction of the planet being flat. Western Christian writer Lactantius ridiculed the notion of a spherical Earth. Quote, "They also thought that heaven revolves in accordance with the motion of the heavenly bodies. For that reason they constructed brass globes as though after the figure of the universe." End quote. While Eastern Christian Arnobius wrote, quote, "In the first place indeed, the world itself is neither right nor left. It has neither upper nor lower regions, nor front nor back. For whatever is round and bounded on every side by the circumference of a solid sphere has no beginning or end." End quote. It was around 240 BC when Eratosthenes first calculated the Earth's circumference, and by the time the 1st century rolled around, Lucretius actually opposed the concept of a round Earth. He believed that we live in an infinite universe, which has no centre towards which heavy bodies would tend, and believed that animals walking around topsy-turvy underneath the Earth was completely absurd. However, Pliny the Elder was on the agreement that the Earth was a sphere, but others were disputing how the ocean would be sustained on a curved shape. Over the centuries, many philosophers such as Leucippus and Democritus were convinced that it was in fact round, but there's conflicting reports about Thales regarding which theory he subscribed most towards. Anaximenes of Miletus wrote, quote, "I believe that the earth is flat and rides on air, in the same way the sun and the moon and the other heavenly bodies which are all fiery ride the air because of their flatness." End quote. Xenophanes believed that the earth was flat, with its upper side touching the air and the lower side extending without any limit. Anaxagoras believed that it was flat, while his pupil Archelaus agreed, and was convinced that the earth was depressed in the middle like a saucer, which would explain exactly why the sunrise and sunset take place at different times for different people across the planet. Early Greek historian and geographer Hecataeus was convinced that the earth was flat, surrounded by water, while Herodotus ridiculed the concept of the world being circled by water, with most reports claiming that he was a flat earth believer. The ancient Norse and Germanic people were in the belief that the world was flat, surrounded by an ocean with a world tree or a pillar in the center of it, while in ancient China they were convinced it was flat and square, but that the heavens were round. English sinologist Christopher Cullen wrote, quote, "Chinese thought on the form of the earth remained almost unchanged from early times until the first contacts with modern science through the medium of Jesuit missionaries in the 17th century. While the heavens were variously described as being like an umbrella covering the earth, or like a sphere surrounding it, or as being without substance, while the heavenly bodies float freely, the earth was at all times flat, although perhaps bulging up slightly." End quote. The late Norse Konung Skuggia wrote, quote, "If you take a lighted candle and set it in a room, you may expect it to light up the entire interior, unless something should hinder, though the room be quite large. But if you take an apple and hang it close to the flame, so near that it is heated, the apple will darken nearly half the room or even more. However, if you hang the apple near the wall, it will not get hot. The candle will light up the whole house, and the shadow on the wall where the apple hangs will be scarcely half as large as the apple itself. From this you may infer that the Earth's circle is round like a ball and not equally near the sun at every point. But when the curved surface lies nearest the sun's path, there will be the greatest path, and some of the lands that lie continuously under the unbroken rays cannot be uninhabited." End quote. While theologian and philosopher St. Augustine agreed, he wrote, quote, "But as to the fable that there are antipodes, that is to say men on the opposite side of the earth, where the sun rises when it sets to us, men who walk with their feet opposite ours, that is on no ground credible, and instead it is not affirmed that this has been learned by historical knowledge, but by scientific conjecture, on the ground that the earth is suspended within the concavity of the sky, and that it has as much room on the one side of it as on the other. Hence they say that the part that is beneath must also be inhabited. But they do not remark that, although it be supposed or scientifically demonstrated that the world is of a round and spherical form, yet it does not follow that the other side of the earth is bare of water. Not even, though it be bare, does it immediately follow that it is peopled. For scripture, which proves the truth of its historical statements by the accomplishments of its prophecies, gives no false information, and it is too absurd to say that some men might have taken ship and traversed the whole wide ocean and crossed from this side of the world to the other, and that thus even the inhabitants of that distant region are descended from that one first man." End quote. Despite this statement, however, some writers claim that Augustine did endorse a flat earth, while historian C.P.E. Nothaft stated, quote, "Other recent writers on the subject treat Augustine's acceptance of the earth's spherical shape as a well-established fact." End quote. It's been reported that the leading figure of the school of Antioch, Diodorus of Tarsus, potentially defended the flat earth theory, though he did receive criticism for doing so. Alexandrian monk Cosmas Indicoplastes actually travelled as far as to Sri Lanka, and his documentation was considered to have been the most valuable geographical document of the early medieval age, though it didn't receive much attention at the time. However, he described the Earth as a rectangle, surrounded by 4 oceans and enclosed by 4 massive walls. Bishop Severian wrote that the Earth was flat, and that the sun doesn't pass under it at night but, quote, "travels through the northern parts as if hidden by a wall." End quote. Though a lot of texts in Europe's early Middle Ages were lost during the collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire, some were preserved, which did in fact support the spherical Earth, though Bishop Isidore of Seville claimed that the Earth resembles a wheel, though most believed that he actually meant in the shape of a disc. Theologian during the Middle Ages Thomas Aquinas was convinced that it was round, and taught people so. During the 12th century, many texts described the planet as round like a table rather than an apple. Gil Tattersall stated, quote, "In virtually all the examples quotes from epics and from non-historical romances, that is, works of a less learned character, the actual form of words used suggests strongly a circle rather than a sphere," end quote, though she did admit that the wording left the consensus rather ambiguous. It was in 1153 when Spanish Muslim astronomer Ibn Rushd visited Marrakesh in Morocco to observe the same star that wasn't visible in the Iberian Peninsula, concluding that this proved that the planet was a sphere. During the late 1400s, some Portuguese actually navigated down and around Africa, monitoring the sun's position and movement, convinced that this proved the world was round. In 1521, explorer Antonio Pigafetta completed the first ever circumnavigation of the globe, and claimed to have lost an entire day during the voyage due to the time difference, proving the east to west curvature of the Earth. It was in 1595 when Matteo Ricci visited China and claimed, quote, "The Ming Dynasty Chinese say the earth is flat and square, and the sky is a round canopy. They did not succeed in conceiving the possibility of the antipodes." End quote. However, over the years, news of the spherical earth spread, and by 1602 it was now widely believed in China. A recent study on the subject wrote, quote, "Since the 8th century, no cosmographer worthy of note has called into question the sphericity of Earth," end quote. And like that, the world widely accepted the Earth being round for many centuries. In 1838, writer Samuel Robotham conducted a Bedford-level experiment on the Old Bedford River to try to prove that there was no curvature on the Earth, and he claimed to have found evidence that it is actually flat. In 1849, he submitted a pamphlet entitled Zetetic Astronomy under his pseudonym Parallax, which he would later turn into a book named Earth, Not a Globe, claiming that the planet is a flat disk centered at the North Pole and bounded by its southern edge of a wall of ice, which would be Antarctica. He went on to state that the Sun and Moon were both 3,000 miles above the planet, and the cosmos were 3,100 miles above. Quote, "The Bible, alongside our senses, supported the idea that the Earth was flat and immovable, and this essential truth should not be set aside for a system based solely on human conjecture." End quote. Robotham and a friend, William Carpenter, began to gain notoriety in public debates, preaching their theory to leading scientists such as Alfred Russel Wallace. However, once Wallace conducted his own Bedford-level experiment at the same location in 1870, it instead concluded that the Earth was round. Robotham used the study of ships disappearing over the horizon as explainable merely by the laws of perspective in relation to the human eye, and not the curvature of the planet. What added to the flat Earth theory was American writer Washington Irving, who claimed that Christopher Columbus had to overcome the opposition of churchmen just to gain sponsorship for his voyage, as they believed that he would expose the fact that the planet was actually flat. But it turned out that this entire story was a myth and never actually happened. It was in 1864 when Carpenter published a Theoretical Astronomy Examined and Exposed, proving the Earth not a globe. He proceeded to move to Baltimore, Maryland, where he then published 100 Proofs the Earth is not a globe. Quote, "There are rivers that flow for hundreds of miles towards the level of the sea without falling more than a few feet. Notable the Nile, which in 1,000 miles falls but a foot. A level expanse of this extent is quite incompatible with the idea of the Earth's convexity. It is therefore a reasonable proof that Earth is not a globe. If the Earth were a globe, a small model globe would be the very best, because the truest thing for the navigator to take to sea with him. But such a thing as that is not known. With such a toy as a guide, the mariner would wreck his ship of a certainty. This is a proof that Earth is not a globe." End quote. Carpenter's friend was prolific preacher John Jasper, who maintained that the planet was flat due to the aforementioned verse from the Bible, with Jesus claiming to have seen all four corners of Earth. Quote, "So we are living on a four-cornered Earth. Then, my friends, will you tell me how in the name of God can an Earth with four corners be round? If the Earth is like others say who hold a different theory, peopled on the other side, those people would be obliged to walk on the ground with their feet upward like flies on the ceiling of a room." End quote. Robotham passed away on December the 23rd, 1884, and 9 years later, Lady Elizabeth Blount took over his passion and established the Universal Cetetic Society. She claimed that the Bible was the unquestionable authority on the natural world, and that nobody could both be a Christian and believe that the world was round. This society actually included moderators in natural science, but was mostly filled with bishops and those of a religious background. It was in 1887 when MC Flanders from Brockport, New York, spent 3 nights arguing against 2 scientists about the possibility of a flat Earth. And by the end of it, 5 locals actually voted unanimously in his favour. Joseph W. Holden from Maine also believed that it was flat, and even after he passed away, his group maintained the theory. Quote, "We hold to the doctrine that the Earth is flat ourselves, and we regret exceedingly to learn that one of our members is dead." End quote. In 1898, Joshua Slocum was conducting a solo circumnavigation of the world when he met some flat earthers in Durban, South Africa, who presented him with a pamphlet in an attempt to prove that it wasn't round. In 1915, Wilbur Glenn Bolivar, who would take over the Christian Catholic Church, often preached about the planet being flat, using a photograph of a 12-mile stretch of the shoreline of Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin, taken 3 feet above the waterline. However, interest in the movement began to die down after the First World War, and the flat Earth theory once again dissipated, despite Bolivar's attempts to keep it alive. It was in 1928 when the airship Italia vanished on an expedition to the North Pole, but Bolivar maintained that it had sailed over the edge of the Earth, and he even offered a $5,000 reward for any proof that the planet is not in fact flat. He even tried to get round Earth teaching banned in schools, and his messages were transmitted on his WCBD radio station. One of his followers was Frank Cherry, who founded the Black Hebrew Israelite religion, and who also taught that the planet was flat, surrounded by 3 layers of heaven. But despite their best efforts, the theory once again died down, but not permanently. On October the 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first ever artificial satellite to space known as Sputnik. But this wasn't enough to convince Samuel Shenton. Quote, "Would sailing round the Isle of Wight prove that it was spherical? It is just the same for those satellites." End quote. Shenton founded the International Flat Earth Research Society, determined to reach children before they would be taught about a round Earth at school. It was in 1967 when he truly began to gain attention during the Apollo program, as he discarded satellite images sent from space. Quote, "It's easy to see how a photograph like that could fool the untrained eye." End quote. Regarding photographs taken by astronauts in space, he claimed that they used a wide-angle lens to give off the illusion of a round shape. Quote, "It's a deception of the public and isn't right." End quote. It was in 1969 when he managed to persuade Ellis Hillman to become president of the Flat Earth Society, and 2 years later Shenton sadly passed away on March the 2nd at the age of 67, with his correspondent Charles K. Johnson inheriting his entire library from his widow. He was named the new president of the society, which quickly grew to 3,500 members. He spent years examining theories of both a flat and a round Earth, and was convinced that a conspiracy was at work. Quote, "The idea of a spinning globe is only a conspiracy of error that Moses, Columbus and FDR all fought. If it is a sphere, the surface of a large body of water must be curved. The Johnsons have checked the surfaces of Lake Tahoe and the Salton Sea without detecting any curvature." End quote. He also used the Bible as evidence and claimed that scientists were pulling a hoax, attempting to replace religion with science. The Flat Earth Society were convinced that we live on a disk, with the North Pole at the centre and Antarctica as the outer edge, standing at 150 feet high. With this map posited, it resembles the symbol of the United Nations, which he considered even further evidence to this theory. The movement gained more members by speaking up against the US government and its agencies, including NASA, convinced that the spherical Earth was only widely accepted by them and the school system in an attempt to remove religion and the concept of God entirely, due to the Bible's clarification of a flat Earth. Later recounting the ultimate motivation for the conspiracy of a spherical Earth, internet influencer Rob Skyber stated, quote, "Many of us have come to believe is hiding God. Once you break down the text of what it represents, there's no way you can get a spinning heliocentric globe out of anything in the Bible." End quote. Speaking up against the society, Eugenie Scott stated, quote, "An example of extreme biblical literalist theology. The earth is flat because the Bible says it is flat, regardless of what science tells us." End quote. Some were even convinced that some members of the Flat Earth Society were actually from the government themselves, employed to make as many ridiculous claims as possible regarding a flat Earth to try to discredit the entire movement from within. On November the 8th, 1970, the Flat Earth Society of Canada was established by philosopher Leo Ferrari, writer Raymond Fraser, and poet Alden Nolan. But these had a different goal to other movements. They claimed to have been planoterrestrialists, and that their problem with the new technological age was the willingness of people to accept theories, quote, on blind faith, and to reject the evidence of their own senses, end quote. Ferrari himself even claimed to have nearly fallen off the edge of the earth at Brimstone Head on Fogo Island in Canada. It was in 1990 when Ferrari was interviewed as an expert in a flat earth mockumentary called In Search of the Edge. But during this, he was exposed as being someone who actually believed that the earth was a globe. The movie's goal was to promote children's critical thinking and media literacy by attempting, quote, to prove in convincing fashion something everyone knew to be false, end quote. In 1997, Charles K. Johnson's home faced a tragic fire, which destroyed all of the Flat Earth Society's records and contacts of their members. Not long after, his wife sadly passed away, and it turned out that she was the manager of the membership database. Furthermore, Charles himself passed away on March the 19th, 2001, and the society once again began to fade away. However, in 2004, Daniel Shenton, no relation to Samuel Shenton, brought the society back on an online discussion forum. He had been fascinated by the theory since the Thomas Dolby album The Flat Earth, and he was convinced that it was true, and that nobody has ever provided any evidence to suggest otherwise. The society was officially relaunched in October 2009, and thanks to the outbreak of social media, it made it a lot easier for the movement to spread their theory across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and various other means. By July of 2017, there were 500 members, and by November, over 500 paid as much as $249 each to attend the first ever Flat Earth Conference in Raleigh, North Carolina. A poll was conducted by YouGov which concluded that only 66% of millennials actually believed that the Earth was round. However, despite the social media boom, YouTube faced criticism for allowing videos to spread misinformation, such as the Flat Earth theory, which led to them agreeing to make changes in their policies to reduce the distribution of such conspiracy theories, though this led to Flat Earthers using this as further evidence of people attempting to silence the truth. Conspiracy theorist Daryl Marble spent hours studying conspiracy videos on Sandy Hook, 9/11, false flags, the Bilderbergers, Rothschilds, and the Illuminati, and claimed, quote, each thing started to make much more sense. I was already primed to receive the whole flat earth idea because we had already come to the conclusion that we were being deceived about so many other things. So of course they would lie to us about this, end quote. One member of the society, Patricia Steer, even admitted that she wouldn't believe an event like the Boston Marathon bombing being real unless she had gotten her own leg blown off personally. Some members even disputed the existence of dinosaurs or evolution. It was that same year when a PhD student at the University of Sfax in Tunisia caused controversy by submitting his dissertation, quote, declaring Earth to be flat, unmoving, young, only 13,500 years of age, and the centre of the universe, end quote. However, astronomer Yeo Naze claimed that this dissertation would not have been approved by the committee if it had been made public, and it would later be denounced anyway. On August the 21st, 2017, the world saw a solar eclipse. However, this led to a barrage of YouTube videos claiming that this actually proved that the Earth was flat, due to people seeing it at the same time from different locations. In actuality, during a lunar eclipse, the shadow of the Earth appears on the moon as a dark circle, which then moves from one side to the other. The only shape that would successfully cast a round shadow, no matter which direction it is pointing at the moon, would be a sphere. Even if a disc were held at an angle, the shape would be an oval, and not a circle like during an eclipse. During an eclipse, it is actually only visible for half of the planet at once, whereas if Earth was flat, we would all see it at the same time. Similarly with day and night. Whilst on the moon, the Earth only blocks a small portion of the sky due to the distance. It's possible to calculate the circumference of the planet using geometry, making it around 40,000 kilometers or 25,000 miles. However, the portion of the sky that is blocked by Earth would change as the altitude increases if it was shaped like a disk and not a sphere. The fixed stars such as Polaris all show no shifts in their position, whereas the Sun, Moon and other planets all change position over time. The shapes of the constellations are all constant, and we're able to use these as a reference point to determine the shape of our planet. It was during ancient times when Aristotle noticed that some stars were visible from Egypt but not from Europe, which would be impossible if the planet was flat. A star has an altitude just above the horizon if it's visible, but watching that same star at the same time but from two completely different latitudes would in fact provide two different altitudes. It was in 2018 when a Scientific American study reported that only 82% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 believed that the world was round. Between April the 27th and 29th, British skeptical activist Michael Marshall visited the annual Flat Earth UK convention, and during his time there he noticed several members actually having disagreements on their views, despite being a part of the same belief group. Some believed that the planet is shaped like a disc, others believed a diamond. Some believed that humans had never been to outer space, and others didn't believe in outer space at all. Organizer of the event Robbie Davidson claimed, quote, "The Earth is a stationary plane with the sun, moon and stars inside a dome." End quote. He considered Earth flying through space to be incredibly ridiculous. On May the 3rd, Steve Novella confirmed that this society truly believed their theory and weren't just trying to prank people. Quote, "In the end, that is the core malfunction of the flat earthers and the modern populist rejection of expertise in general. It is a horrifically simplistic view of the world that ignores, partly out of ignorance and partly out of motivated reasoning, to real complexities of our civilization. It is ultimately lazy, childish and self-indulgent, resulting in a profound level of ignorance drowning in motivated reasoning." End quote. On June the 10th, an experiment was carried out by the independent investigations group of the Centre for Enquiry at the Salton Sea, determined to prove the curvature of the Earth, as the group witnessed a boat disappearing over the horizon. However, all flat earthers in attendance rejected the results, citing moon landing conspiracy theories and NASA cover-ups. The main consensus within the movement is that NASA guards the ice wall at Antarctica to prevent intruders revealing the truth. They believe that the government have fabricated satellite images and have even speculated the colour of the ocean changing from picture to picture, and that continents never seem to be in the same place. It was even a theory that some members were dissuaded from attending conventions as other attendees were working for the CIA. YouTube group Globebusters attempted to disprove the Earth's rotation by using a ring laser gyroscope. However, it did the opposite and proved a 15 degree per hour rotation, though this result was rejected, and they claimed that the device was corrupted by the rotation of the firmament instead, which is a celestial barrier which separates the heavenly waters above from the Earth below. Another group attempted to use lasers on a long stretch of water to show that it was perfectly flat, measuring the distance between the water level and the laser beam along 3 vertical points. However, they were unable to align the beam as the surface of the still water was bent by several feet, though they claimed the results were inconclusive. Mark Sargent was another flat earther who closely monitored FlightAware.com to check for any flights travelling between continents within the southern hemisphere, to prove that if the Earth was flat they would actually be much further away than on a globe. He claimed to have been unable to find any such flights, which therefore proved that the planet was flat. However, astrophysicist Hannelore Gerling Dunsmore was able to find such flights immediately, contradicting his entire story. Mike Hughes was a daredevil and stuntman, and supposedly a flat earther, who wanted to use a home-built crude rocket to reach space and prove that it was a disc shape. Sadly, on February the 22nd, 2020, during a practice flight, due to early deployment and the separation of a return parachute, his rocket malfunctioned, and he was sent plummeting back down hundreds of feet, dying instantly. While some maintain that this experiment was to prove the Earth was flat, his representative Darren Schuster claimed that he wasn't a flat earther at all, and that the entire thing was a PR stunt for publicity, and it just sadly went horrifically wrong. Many of those within the movement claim to have actually lost partners, friends, or relationships with family members due to their beliefs, as they were tired of being called an idiot. This led to a Facebook group called Flat Earth Match being set up as a dating platform for those to find someone with similar beliefs. Physicist Spiros Michalakis actually claimed that scientists shouldn't be denigrating the flat earthers, but instead they should be doing a better job teaching scientific facts. However, other experts claim that people just distrust all of science, including vaccines, evolution, and climate change, which could lead to them making poor decisions and being easily manipulated. The flat earth theory would suggest that without any obstructions such as mountains, hills, valleys or volcanoes, you would be able to see distant objects without any issue, whereas a spherical surface would contain a horizon. The degree of the planet's curvature of the Earth's surface is the same everywhere. However, the atmosphere bends light as it travels through, which can often give off the illusion of the surface being flat, or sometimes curved, which leads to more speculation over which argument is correct. The atmosphere bending can be recognised in photos at sunset when the sun is distorted, or on ships on the horizon. Ships disappearing over the horizon on an ocean show a clear progression of the curvature, as the highest parts of the ship will still be visible while the lower parts can't. Sailing ships would also often have a sailor climb the mast to see further across the sea for this very reason. The North Pole has 6 months of continuous nighttime before the subsequent opposite, and directly overhead is Polaris, the centre of the planet's rotation. From here, 88 modern constellations are visible, whereas at the South Pole, a completely different set can be seen during their 6 months of nightfall. If the planet was flat, the sun would light up the entire surface all at the same time for everyone. Those involved in the Flat Earth Society answer this by claiming that the sun doesn't emit light in every direction, but acts more like a spotlight, only illuminating certain points at one time. However, this would still light up the sky even partially at any given time, not explaining pure darkness at certain points at times around the world. And this also doesn't explain the various different time zones. Furthermore, on a flat surface, sunset and sunrise would quite literally only last seconds due to the lack of the non-curved landmass. Several experiments have been done over the centuries, measuring the angle of the sun at local noon from different cities of various different distances, which showed a 180-degree north to south curvature, consistent for a sphere-like shape and not a disc. Furthermore, if the Earth was flat, the Sun would be much further away than the distance we already know it to be. For centuries, people have sailed or flown around the planet in all different directions, and nobody has ever found an edge or a barrier. Antarctica wasn't explored until the 1950s, but since then many planes have crossed over it in various different directions. Some pilots would use this as a shorter way to travel from South America to Australia, which wouldn't at all be possible if the Earth was flat. Furthermore, planes very often deviate from their route, making 90-degree turns, travelling thousands of miles an hour, whereas if the planet was flat, the flight would be a completely straight line. The meridian of longitude is a line where a local solar noon takes place at the same time each day, meaning that the sun would always be at the same angle. If the Earth was flat, the meridian lines would always be the same distance apart and would form a square grid. In reality, they get further apart the closer you travel to the equator, which would only be possible on a sphere. Furthermore, the laws of gravity, chemistry and physics allow us to work out the sheer mass of Earth, and a planet of this size would simply not be able to support itself against its own gravitational pull if it was flat. A disk would most likely crack, heat up, liquefy and reform into a roughly spherical shape. In addition, if a disk was strong enough to maintain its shape, gravity wouldn't pull downward like it does, but more so towards the center of the disk, though some flat earthers are convinced that the gravity of the planet is constantly accelerating upwards. However, this would mean that the Earth would approach light speed as the pull of gravity would increase by minus 9.8 milliseconds every single second. The mathematics of all GPS satellites all suggest that they are moving in orbits around a spherical surface, and very often those in aircraft, skydiving or in high altitude balloons are able to physically see the curvature of the planet right in front of them, though others claim that camera lenses and windows distort the images to give off the false illusion. The Flat Earth theory has been widely discredited by the majority of the world, but the movement of their society continues to grow and the theory expands, so I guess we all have to wonder how or why this happens every few years, as we continue seeking answers.